announcements, and then we will introduce tonight's speaker. You are all here for this lecture series, and can't hear me?
No.
Okay.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So we're all here for the Conversation Piece lecture series, and this is the third installment of the series. We will be finishing the series with Louise Erdrich on April 15th, right here in the Cooperage. So I hope to see you all there for that event. And we will be also, during that month, we will be celebrating Rasa and Native American Heritage Month. So the talk by Louise Erdrich will be part of that month, as well as we have Valley Folklorico Night, also actually not here in the Cooperage, but in Warren Auditorium on Saturday, May 7th, and that is in honor of Mexican Mother's Day. So moms are free for that event, and I hope to see you again for that. One other quick announcement, and then we'll do a group exercise. And that is that the applications for the summer tour are due March 31st. We are running a summer tour to Brazil. It's a 14-day tour, and we will be looking at various areas of Brazil. It's conducted by Global Exchange through cooperation with the Intercultural Center, my office. So if you'd like more information on that tour, please visit us. We're in the bottom level of the Student Union, right behind the elevator. Come see me. And we will give you more information on that and other programs in the Intercultural Center. So, on to our group exercise. I have a fun activity for us. What I'd like for everyone to do is lift out your cell phones. Let's hold up our cell phones. Let me see. Okay, let's do this together. Hit that power button. Painless. And here to introduce tonight's speaker is Francisco Vasquez of the Hutchins Department. Hutchins School of
It's an honor to be invited to do this introduction. And when I was asked to do that and I started writing it, I did about 10 pages, but I figured his is bigger than me. So I'm going to give you the basics of who Mr. Greg Sarris is, stuff that you would find in his resume. Although I have the feeling that most of you already know who he is, but and then I'll add some of my own thoughts after reading his novels. Santa Rosa native, Mr. Greg Sarris has published several books, including the widely anthologized collection of essays, Keeping Snowy Women Alive, a holistic approach to American Indian texts, Watermelon Nights, in Grant Avenue, an award-winning collection of short stories which was adapted for an HBO miniseries of the same name. Mr. Sarris has written plays for Pieces of the Quilt, Intersection Theater, and the Market Reform, and a play entitled Mission Indians, which ran in February 2002 at the Intersection Theater in San Francisco. He is also serving as chairman of his tribe, the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria, formerly known as the Federated Coast Miwok. After an 8-year campaign, Sarris rallied the 407 members of his small tribe and regained federal recognition when President Clinton signed a measure that gave the tribe a new name, Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. A screenwriter as well as a novelist, Sarris uses Sonoma County as the setting for his fiction, focusing on Native American ancestors he came to know about the time when he was in his teens. He learned from elders, in particular from basket maker and tribal dreamer Mabel McKay, whose biography he wrote. In an interview with heard, Sarris said, quote, "Indian woman run the show. The chief always took direction from the dreamer." Mabel McKay with S. Parrish was the last of the old-time dreamers, unquote. In the article, he told of driving McKay up the coast one foggy night. As he complained and worried about the hazardous drive, she sang a fog song, and the road cleared. Quote, "The fog opened up. It was a tunnel, I swear to you," Sarris stated. Mabel said, "I guess the song worked." "She always reminded me," said Sarris, "there was a world bigger than myself. She gave me a sense of the ancient cultural world around here," unquote. After reading Mr. Sarris's Grand Avenue, I can also hear his own song, clearing the fog in a centuries-old struggle that includes not only American Indians, Filipino, and Mexicans, of which he's going to talk about tonight, but a struggle that also includes all human beings that form part of what is known as we the people. His song, I hear as part of the melody that we the people have voiced against the absolute power of the monarchs of any race, and continue to sing for self-determination against new forms of control and dehumanization. Please welcome Mr. Greg Sarris.
Thank you. You should keep speaking. That was great. I was beginning to become lyrical, and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to top that? You should have been the speaker. Thank you all for coming, and again, thank you. I realize that the vacation's starting, and you haven't taken off or gone places, and you cared enough to come out tonight. So thank you all, and thank many people, many faces here. It's great to see you. It's great for me to be home. You know, I've been away from home in one way for 30 years, although in my mind I've never left. But I left here when I was about 21 or 22. Do the math. For those of you who care about those things, I see the little minds going. But the first years, of course, of your life and growing up are always the most impressive. And I had as I think most of us do, a love-hate affair with Sonoma County. And it's a bittersweet kind of history, the things that we've experienced. And but yet it's home, and we have to, if we're here, we have to claim all parts of it. I want to talk tonight about not just my own family, but some of my work. And I want to begin when I get to the family and a history of the Indian people here, because ultimately there is no history of Indian people or Filipino people or Mexican people or Anglo people or whatever you want to say in isolation in America. You can't think that way. We're all here together, and you have to find the ways in which we're all related. And Indian people are interesting because we can't get away with it no matter how we want to create our own Indianness, because in our blood around here is the history of America and what happened here. We have Spanish, Mexican, Russian, everything in us here. And yet we remain, of course, Indian, and I'll talk more about that. But you, again, cannot begin thinking about us, or any of us, in units. We're all here together. Separation, as Tillich said, is the greatest sin. And one of the things that TV and everything else does, and our education, is follow what colonialism did. And colonialism basically made people strangers in their homeland. I mean, besides the other obvious things that happened, the massacres, the violence, the oppression, the end result is that indigenous people and people everywhere become strangers in their homeland. They become separated from their history, their past, and hence become, in many ways, powerless. It continues, though, right in the schools, and it starts in kindergarten, doesn't it? Think about it. Some of you are old enough to remember, I don't know what they're teaching now, but it probably still works the same way. Some of you are old enough to remember Dick and Jane? Yes, and Spot. How many kids were like Dick and Jane and Spot? I mean, if Dick and Jane and Spot came through the neighborhood where I grew up, they would have been robbed and beat up. They wouldn't have got through the other side. And Spot, that most antiseptic representative of dogdom, are there dogs like that? Where I come from, dogs are full of fleas. They chase cars, you kick them, whatever, you know. Some people eat them. But Dick and Jane, you know. What happens in school, folks, is that we learn to put who and what we are, our experiences, on the back burner and substitute the culture of the classroom for what we are or what we're supposed to be. And for those of us who do it best, we succeed. But what we succeed in becoming is successfully schizophrenic. So that by the time you come to college, you are totally colonized, right? You have learned how to think and how to think about what, and that who and what you are has no place in the classroom. Okay? So that you go to become a social worker. You take a Sociology 1 class, and they tell you the nuclear family is comprised of mother, father, siblings, right? Well, what if you're Filipino, Mexican, American, or Indian? Isn't the nuclear family comprised of auntie, uncle, grandma too? And grandpa? No, but you graduate, you don't say anything, and then you become a social worker, and when grandma's raising the kids, you determine it's a dysfunctional family and you yank them out of the home, right? Instead of keep them there. That kind of thing continues. It perpetuates a cycle of alienation and ultimately destruction for who we are. Well, I was a good, easily destructed person when I got to college. I didn't go to college. I was interested in sports. I really was not interested in learning. In fact, I didn't read a book until I was in 11th grade. For all of you who, you know, think if you didn't read or have a great education, you know, you're doomed. Well, don't worry about it. The first book I read was in 11th grade. It was The Old Man and the Sea. And I remember feeling sorry for the fish. And that was not what the teacher wanted. Inauspicious beginnings for a professor and a writer. But I moved ahead. And then you know, when I was growing up here in South Park, you know, there were Indian doctors and stuff around there. And, you know, you didn't mess with them because you saw them do strange things. And when you were trying to grow up, and I know some of the people I grew up in that area, when you heard stuff like that, you wanted to have a nice car and beat up the guy down the block. You didn't want to impress people by saying, oh, I have an aunt who sucks diseases out of patients' lungs. That didn't work in the 60s, right? Of course, then I get to UCLA, and they'd all been reading Carlos Castaneda, and of course, they expect you to have a vision on the spot. Oh, it's crazy. But I milked it. I used it. I said, oh yeah, if there was a class on American Indian literature, I took it. And the teacher had us sit around at his house in a circle to get the American Indian experience and smoke a peace pipe. You know, where I come from, first of all, only the medicine people had pipes, and you didn't go around sucking on them. And we had what we call the menstrual taboo, where, you know, women are honored for 5 days. You wait on them and all that. Again, there's been often a feminist reading of that it's a restrictive and mean to women. Well, in our culture, the women stay home. You have to cook up for them, wait on them, and do everything for them. All they get to do is read and do what they want. We call it queen for 5 days. You know, the men don't get that. But anyway, you're supposed to, you know, not do anything. But I sit in the circle in Beverly Hills. I do the whole routine. You know, I suck the pipe, and, you know, there's like 15, 20 young women there, and chances are, but do I say anything? No. Professor said, you come from an oral culture. You tell stories. You don't have to write a paper. I thought, whoa, this is big UCLA. I thought I had problems at Santa Rosa JC. This is going to be a cinch. So I remember telling a story that my Auntie Susie told me about Coyote and Frog Woman. I remember all those students busy taking notes, analyzing, as the old people say. Analyze what I'm doing. I got an A in literature class. So I was really doing well, and I took an anthropology class then on California Indians. Well, the professor was Clement Meehan, who had done his dissertation on the Pomo. He was also Carlos Castaneda's mentor, incidentally. But he had done his dissertation on the Pomo, and he had tried to analyze Mabel McKay. And he said, well, you know, you don't have to take a test or write or do anything if you can get her to answer some questions for me. It's like, this UCLA, I mean... You know, Sonoma State's thinking of hiring me. It's a big phony degree. But anyway, I'm smart. I can work it, right? So anyway, I said, oh, I'll tell you anything you want to know. So I went home, and I thought I'd help Mabel with the laundry, right? I'd butter up the old lady and, you know, get some answers. He had to give me a list of questions. What does she do with crystals? And does she use herbs and all this sort of stuff? So we're going to the laundry, and she starts, I start asking her these questions, and she's looking at me, this kid who used to run away from this stuff and didn't want any part of it, and think, what is this? She didn't answer me. So we get to the laundromat, and then, of course, one of my cousins drives up in her car, this another interesting woman in what we call traditional American Indian dress in those days, which was a muumuu, rubber thongs, and those pink and purple foam curlers, and sometimes sunglasses. I see some people nodding their heads. It's okay, it's cool. We never say our women are fat, they're powerful, so don't ever say anything like that. Anyway, so I have a powerful auntie that jumps out of her car at the laundromat with sunglasses with a missing lens. And Mabel hugs her. And I was at UCLA and thought I was cool, and on the way home, I'm saying, oh, Mabel, why'd you hug her? She's, this or that. And I said, the daughters were loose. All the guys in the neighborhood knew them. We all knew those daughters, blah, blah, blah. Mabel's listening and smoking her cigarette. I was an arrogant, stupid kid. Probably even stupider than I am now. And then I started asking her questions again. And she says, wait a minute. You want to know about crystals and stuff? Let me tell you about that woman. And she told me about how that woman had been a medicine woman and had misused some of the songs that she had, and that somebody had poisoned her and put a curse on her and her family, that anybody that had anything to do with them would be cursed with sex wildness. And she said, now how well did you know those daughters? Well, I began to understand something very important, and it was the start of me really for the first time learning anything. And that is that in school, a story is something that is considered something separate from you. It's in a book. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and your job is to analyze it, fix it, and put it aside. At home, a story is not something separate from you. It's living. It's a part of you. It does not have a beginning and middle and end, therefore, and your job is not to fix it or analyze it, but to have a dialogue with it. As one of my aunties said, when us Indians hear a story, we wonder about it. We think about it, because it's going to live with us. We want to know about its genealogy, its stories. She says, we know we don't know. She says, the white man is different. He don't want to know he don't know. And as Mabel said, don't ask me what it means, the story. Life will teach you about it as it teaches you about life. And I began to think again about this chasm, and though I couldn't articulate it, I understood that who and what I was, and my own experience as a human being, had been put way on the back burner in school. And that how I knew and understood things was not allowed in the classroom, had no place there, at a very fundamental level. Well, I went on, I got to Stanford, by telling oral stories. And I began to write stories. I was in the writing program, and professors, I was writing stories about Indian people and mixed blood people here in Santa Rosa. And the professor said to me, who are these people? You're never going to be publishing stories like this. Because again, it was Indians, but we weren't on Appaloosas and Pintos running around shooting arrows. They were in South Park. And it was, of course, in those days, they were trying to get us to write the New Yorker story. In the early 1982, the minimalist story. Remember, Sally goes to Martha's Vineyard one summer, she has an epiphany and decides to part her hair on the other side of her head. Do you know from people like that? I don't. So, anyway, he said you'll never be able to publish, and I did what a lot of failed writers or frightened writers do. I became a professor. And once I got a job and knew that I wasn't going to have to dig ditches anymore, or bartend, I went back to my stories. And to show you, and you young people particularly, that you must follow your voice and your experience is what counts and what makes the difference ultimately, is that this publisher gave me a lucrative 2-book deal and denied that, or turned down that professor's last book. So, Poetic Justice. Then Robert Redford wanted to make a movie, Of course, the big trouble we had right away is who did you want to cast in the lead? Some of you know this story, Cher. Can you see her driving down from the Kashaya Reservation in a station wagon singing Half-Breed? I don't think so. Besides, she's skinny. I wanted the script. I wanted it to look like we do, brown and round. So, anyway, I had to resort to gang warfare. And I took Robert Redford up to the reservation. Of course, I had to call my aunts first. And I called and I said, Auntie, Robert Redford wants to come up. You need to see him. And I told her all my problems. I've got to get you to convince him and these producers we can't have Cher. So she said, well, when? And I said, well, in 2 days he's going to be down at Lucas's ranch cutting a film. And the phone dropped. She picked it up about 15 seconds later. And she said, no, I'm sorry. And I said, Auntie, why not? She said, how the hell am I going to lose 100 pounds in 2 days? Of course, ultimately, she said yes. And we went on up to the res. You know, I love taking people up there because there's redwoods and beautiful road, and they think, you know, Bambi's going to jump out and he's going to shoot with an arrow or something any minute. Of course, then when they see the junk cars, they go, what's this? I said, we're almost home. They always want to go for a walk on the res. I don't know. You know, it's a ghetto in the woods. What are you going to see? So anyway, we get up there, and of course, they're always shocked, too, that we're in trailers and not in teepees. Of course, we never did have teepees here, but anyway. We go in, and of course, I should have prepared for my aunts, because anyway, we get in there, my aunt's trailer, and there's 3 powerful women in muumuus, thongs, pink and purple foam curlers, and sunglasses with a missing lens. You know, and I could see Robert Redford looking at these eyes and these tall women, thinking this is some Indian spiritual thing. Well, anyway, he comes in, I introduce him to them, and of course we have a lot of food. I've talked about this again. You know, when people come in our culture or to our house, we offer food. We put up food. It may all be on paper plates, but there's a lot of it. Pies, tamales, all of that. You know, you honor people that way when your guests come. Have you ever been to really rich people's houses? They serve you on this incredible china and silverware, and then they give you a piece of asparagus. You know why they're skinny. Anyway, my aunt kicks him in the butt. And it's been a long time since anybody's kicked Robert Redford in the butt, let alone a powerful Indian woman. And she said to him, Mr. Redford, do you think we're standing around here looking like this for nothing? And he sees this eye gaping. And he said, no, but I'd be honored if you told me. And she says, well, damn it, look us over good, because which one of us gets the part? They were auditioning. Of course, then when Redford sat down, she said, just sit here, Mr. Redford. I'm going to eat my pie and look at you for a while. Then she told him she'd like to take him down to the river and just lather him up. He didn't want to go for a walk after that. She told him us women up here sit around in the bush and wait for strange men. Anyway, we didn't have Cher. And I won that battle due to gang warfare and who and what we are. But again, it's a constant struggle to tell a true story and a real story, and not a story that's imposed upon you. And as long as there's a chasm in your life, you're going to let Hollywood, you're going to let school, you're going to let the authorities continue to keep you separate from who and what you are. A real history, a lived experience. What is the history around here? I can only give you my version, my limited understanding of it. But I'll start with the Indian history and then come back to my own. Where we're sitting right now, there were more indigenous people than there were anywhere else north of Mexico at the time of contact. There are over 30 different languages in this area, some as different as English is from Chinese. Most of the old people spoke 10 to 15 different languages. They had to. It was a complex system culture here where it was basically based on respect. There were a lot of what we called secret cults, bear cults, and things like that. You wouldn't kill people. The anthropologists and others said, how did so many people speaking so many different languages live side by side for so many years with virtually little physical warfare? And the answer is, we poisoned people. But we did it. I mean, one of the things that we were taught, and Mabel always taught me this, that everything in life has songs and has power, so you don't violate. You didn't, for instance, chop down a tree or steal, because that tree or your whatever has songs that its owner, the owners, whoever had a relationship with that tree, knew and you didn't. And those songs, even if they were good, they were protection songs. They would come back. So if you violated another person, if you violated a woman, if you violated a child, a tree, an animal, a rock, or even the way the water flowed, it would come back on you. And that way you were constantly reminded of what you didn't know. You were constantly reminded that you were not the center of the universe. Again, many of the anthropologists of culture, characterize these cultures as cultures predicated on fear. No, they were cultures predicated on a profound respect for otherness and difference. The more different you were, the more honored. And again, one of the things, the Kashaya word for the newcomers was palacha, or miracles. And I used to ask the old people, why do you call the Anglos, why do you call the Americans miracles? And they said, because when they came and they started chopping down trees and killing people and killing animals, instead of being punished, more of them kept coming. So we thought they were miraculous. But of course, as we all know today, nobody's miraculous. Because in fact, if you look at the environment, and if you look at the water, and you look at everything else, the cancer rates, it's all coming back on all of us. It just took longer. The Indians just had a more direct route. But it's all coming back. That disconnection, that separation from history, from home. One of the things that's happened, folks, remember, it started way back in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and probably earlier, when there became a people exiled from their homeland who became a chosen people. And those chosen people, out of anger and frustration, then continued that legacy of what? Dislocation wherever they went. Colonization spread, and as I said at the top of the lecture, it keeps going. And it's become a legacy to keep us separate from who we are, what we are, where we are, and certainly from seeing where we're going. Do you realize that today it's become morphed again into a very interesting thing? Today we're living in a culture that's the first in human history, and that's a culture where youth is privileged over age. Never in any other culture at any other time has that happened. And now, how are we going to learn? The only way you learn is by what's happened. And if you're not looking at what's happened and only ahead, what's the mechanism for learning? We're in big trouble unless we move ahead. Well, of course, then the Spanish came, the mission period came, and the first mission in this area was built in San Rafael about 1812, 1813. It was established. They began to build it. And it was first built as a sort of a hostel for the sick from Mission Dolores in San Francisco. And so they would bring all the sick Indian folks over here, which of course quickly spread disease. And of course then when they realized there were so many Indians here, they said, well, we better build it, make this one bigger, and then we'll put one over in Sonoma. Sonoma, as you know, was the last mission that was built. The missions were secularized, and in about 1834, 1832, the Mexican period came over. We lost many people during the mission period due to disease and enslavement, but the Mexican period was probably even more hostile here because the Mexican rancho system under Vallejo and largely his family created an elaborate slave trading system where they sold mostly all the young people, and especially the Indian men, sold them and traded them on ranchos and as far away as Mexico, totally disrupting the culture. In fact, most of the people who survived that period were women who became wives or concubines to the generals. And hence, all of us go back to many mixed situations. In that situation where our great-grandmothers were raped or concubines, the only way they could survive is to become the Mexicans' property. California became a state. Of course, there was the Bear Flag Revolution. California became a state in 1850, and the first piece of legislation that was passed in the state of California was the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which legalized Indian slavery. It stipulated that Indians became the rightful property of whosever land they were on. That was not repealed until 1868, 3 years after the Civil War, right here in wonderful Sonoma County in the square. It used to be the old courthouse square in downtown Santa Rosa. Indians were bought and sold for $200 a piece from the ranches around here by early Americans. When that law was repealed, it didn't quite stop because the law was amended so that you could own the children if the parents gave you permission. So what they did was kill the parents to keep the children. And again, the only way an Indian could escape this is that if she was, and I say she, because the women have the option, of being a mistress or a maid, literally to be owned by an early American. In the early part of the 20th century, as more Americans came to California, and the ranches became smaller and smaller and became more densely populated, and they didn't have use for Indian labor the way they used to. Indians became, in many ways, had nowhere to go. So the government began to create rancherias and reservations for the so-called homeless Indians of California. And what they did is de facto created tribes. And they would just take survivors many times in many places. So in our case, they established the Grayton Rancheria. They gave us 15.5 acres in Grayton for the homeless Indians of Tamaulipas, Bodega, Sebastopol, and the vicinities thereof. They didn't call us tribes or anything. We were all diggers or just homeless Indians. They didn't say tribes or anything. They just said homeless Indians of this area. So de facto, they created a tribe of Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok survivors. Now, there were more of us at the time, but at the end, towards the end of the 19th century, there were 14 of us approximately left. At the time of contact, there were 30,000 Indians here. All of us today in the tribe, the enrolled members, there's 1,077 are the descendants of 14 survivors. And again, this is things we don't hear about, the horrible Holocaust and genocide here. It's a sad story, but it's one, I think, also that attests to an incredible survival, adaptation, and finally a lesson. In 1958, California passed the California Indian Rancheria Termination Act, which was an updated version of the Dawes Act, and it allowed Indian people to own their land privately. And it went around to many of the rancherias here, but it terminated the tribe and your rights as Indians and offered them the option of owning their land. Well, they came to us in August of, two agents came here in August of 1958. And in August in those days, we were harvesting. We were in the fields working. We weren't on the reservations, a lot of us. So when they came to the Great Rancheria, there were two elderly men there, and neither of them read particularly well or understood the concepts of law. And when two agents said to them, "Would you like to own your land?" to two old Indian guys, that sounded good. So they signed the piece of paper, and when we came back, we not only no longer had our reservation or our land, but we had been terminated as a tribe. We lost our sovereign status. Of course, it was illegal because the Termination Act stipulated that it had to be by a consensus of the tribe, which we discovered, well, many Indians knew, but we took it up beginning in 1991. I began the struggle with the tribe and finally was able to write a bill to get through Congress to determine that that action was illegal and give us back our status as a sovereign nation and have land again, once again. But it was more than just land. It was a way of legitimizing our history. And one of the things that you're seeing here is a constant, whenever in colonial situations, there's always a hierarchy of those who are legitimate and those who are not. And the Indian tended to be, regardless of blood quantum, at the bottom. My own story, how does it fit in there? How did I find it? My great-great-grandmother's name was Supu. Her Christian name was Maria Checa. She was born in the San Rafael Mission. Her parents were originally from Bodega and Petaluma. When she was 12, the missions were secularized, and she was taken with other Indian girls into Vallejo's fort here in Petaluma. And he used to take the girls in there, and the Mexican soldiers rape them, string them up on walls, and do all kinds of sex games and things with the girls, most of whom died in the process. She ran away. She walked barefoot all the way up to Fort Ross, and the Russians had colonized Fort Ross. The Russians were there from 1812 to 1842. The Indians in this area knew that if they could get up to Fort Ross in the Russian territory, they would be safe from the Mexicans because the Mexicans armed them, the Russians armed them against the Mexicans. So she got up there, and she had she had 4 children from a man named Komshital, and he was Creole. He was Russian, Aleut, and Kashaya Pomo. And things were going well. I mean, the Russians worked the Indians there, but they didn't treat them the way the Mexicans did, and they didn't attempt to convert them to their religion, the Russian Orthodox religion. They pretty much let them be. in that regard. But then the Russians abandoned the fort in 1842 after they decimated the otter population. When they had no longer otter pelts, they took off. And it left the Indians then open to marauding Mexican and early American slave traders. Supu, with her 4 children, went down to Captain Stephen Smith, who settled Bodega Bay and had a huge rancho in Bodega Bay and a South American wife. She became his maid/mistress and had 6 children from him, named them and the first 4 Smith, and in that way, as his property, she was protected. So that people knew, whenever she would say Smith, that if they stole her or their children, they would be subject to laws as if they had stole one of Captain Smith's horses or cattle. And that's the way she survived. One of Comchatal's children was a guy named Tom Smith, my great-grandfather, and he was quite an interesting guy. He was supposedly the last Miwok medicine man, and he did many things. There was a cave below Bodega Bay where the medicine people used to go, and they used to take the Indian doctors or people who started dreaming, and they'd take a long pole and push them under the water. And if the dream was right, they'd know where to swim under that water, and then they'd come out 4 days later. If they were faking it, they couldn't come back at all. And so I'm a little distracted because you just saw 2 police walk in. I don't know what they want. But don't worry, the casino's not open yet. I was telling a good story. Anyway, Tom Smith went under there, and he came back. He was greedy. He took everything, songs, everything he could see under that cave. When he floated back up, one of the big things he had was love songs, and he ended up having about 40 children, and every year there was an Indian doctor, and from Lake County to Tamales Bay, they're Smiths. And we're all related. Of course, the story goes because he misused his love medicine. We're all cursed with sex weapons. I say it's a good excuse, but whatever. One of the women that he got to know was obviously my ancestor, Emily Stewart from Tamales, and she was Scottish and Coast Miwok. And she ended up having his childhood up in Humboldt County, where she was with another man who was in the logging, because remember there was a lot of logging going on, and the Indian people would follow wherever the work was, and the work camps there. And anyway, their daughter, Nettie Smith, then came down here and moved around. She was in Santa Rosa growing up, and then she ended up in San Francisco, and one of the things, she got tangled up with a guy named Arthur Saragosa there, who was Mexican and Indian. And they had my grandmother, Evelyn Saragosa. Evelyn Saragosa had a sister, Juanita, and a brother, Albert. They were all taken to Sherman Indian School in the 20s. Many Indian people were from here taken to Sherman, and they put them on the train. You see some people nodding because our parents and grandparents were taken. And they went down there, and in Sherman Indian schools, like all the Indian schools, they taught the women to be maids and the men to be mechanics. And my grandmother and her sister and brother ran away from there. And they figured if they were taken on a train down, if they hopped on a train, they'd get back. In those days, people used to hop trains. Remember the hobos and all that period? We used to hitchhike back in the 60s. Those people used to hop trains. So they figured they'd hop a train and come back. They got as far as East LA. And my uncle, Albert, ended up marrying a black woman. Juanita married a Mexican and populated half of East LA. And my grandmother married a Filipino. And they had my father, Emilio Hilario, who was Filipino, Indian, with a small amount, obviously, of Mexican there. And he grew up in East LA, for all intent and purposes, Latin. My grandfather was Filipino. Now, that's the other thing that is very important here. I've got to do a footnote. The Filipino culture here, those Manongs, that first generation, they came here and they married Indian women. In fact, in our communities, the Filipino blood admixture is enormous, up to 1.5 in some Indian communities. Because, as my grandmother said, those Filipino guys were good workers and a good catch. Grandpa said, I didn't want to marry her. She was just all over me. Yeah. Those Filipino guys also tended to be quite braggarts. Of course, when my grandmother died, Grandpa carried around her pink wallet for 10 years, wishing she'd come back, I suppose. But anyway, he was a kitchen worker, my grandfather, and he got a job in Laguna Beach and brought my 12-year-old father and his 2 younger kids, my uncle Art and my Aunt Rita, with him to Laguna Beach, which is all white. And it was really a different world for them than East LA. And my father grew up exalted as an athlete, but when he went to date the white girls, they'd say, "Sorry, Chief, we're not hiring any gardeners," and slam the door in his face. He proceeded to get 5 of them pregnant, in the good old Tom Smith tradition, and one of whom was my mother. And ironically, my mother, her name was Bunny Hartman. Her father was Howard Hartman, the president of the May Company, and her mother was his mistress. So I'm really proud. I'm like 2nd and 3rd and 4th generation illegitimate. I'm really proud of it. So can you imagine Howard Hartman, the president of the May Company, having a grandson who was an Indian chief? It's good. Only in America. So they don't claim me, but you know, if you want to do a DNA test, I'll do it. So anyway, Buddy Hartman was pregnant, and her mother, ironically, brought her at 16 up here to hide her out because they didn't know that it was the homeland of the boy's mother. This was just a little dot on the map in the middle of nowhere in 1951, fall of 51, and there was a good Jewish doctor, and they'd hide here, give up the baby. Remember in those days if a girl got pregnant, they took a trip. Remember there was a trip or something like that? That kind of thing. So they went on a trip to Santa Rosa. And my mother obviously had me arranged for my adoption. But she never gave up the name of my father. My father was 22 at the time, and they would have hung him. She basically, on my birth certificate, all it said was, for father, unknown, non-white. Remember those days they used to put the race of the kids on the birth certificate, especially if you're going to adopt something, you got to know what kind of animal they're getting. This one wasn't a purebred. So 2 days after my mother had me, she needed blood. She was 16. Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital gave her blood and gave her the wrong type blood, and it killed her. And her mother secretly buried her in the pauper section of Calvary Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery up here, with nothing to mark her grave but an upside down horseshoe. But I think my mother would be very happy to know that in that section she got buried along with Indian people. One of them, George, was your grandfather, Gib Elgin. He is 2 graves up from my mom. So anyway, I grew up not knowing what I was. The Sarrises adopted me. They thought they couldn't have children. They're a middle-class, supposedly happy Anglo couple. And of course, what happens when people adopt? Today people are doing fertility drugs and all this crap to get pregnant. Just adopt. You'll get pregnant. It always happens. Right? So they thought they couldn't have kids for 7 years. They adopt this, mongrel thing, and immediately they're pregnant with their own. Well, George Sarris didn't want me particularly, even when he proceeded to have 3 of his own. And I ended up going out and being raised on ranches and farms among Mexican and Indian people. George, I hate to come back to you on this one, but in junior high, I went out with your sister, who's my half cousin, and I didn't know, or second cousin, and I didn't know it. Teaches you to know who your relations are.
I was in Vietnam.
You were in Vietnam. I heard about George because George is this big bad guy, and there was your mom and your sisters, and there was no other guys over there. So I wasn't worried. But if George came home, I was going to get out of there. But anyway. So I went on to, high school, and finally, when I began to trace my roots and find out who I was and what this unknown non-white was, it was more ultimately for me than just finding out. Remember, blood, just because you have Indian blood does not change your point of view about anything. As I say, race and ethnicity does not presuppose point of view. Look at Condoleezza Rice. Again, it's experience. And again, with Mabel and the kids that I grew up with around eventually on the ranches and in South Park on the west side of town, that's who I was. This kid who's lonely, who didn't know where he belonged, but I listened to stories. And I understood, and I listened to the genealogies. And when I found out and how I fitted in and how I was a part of this, what became important for me is to make not just myself, but in the process, my people, my whole people, my home legitimate. A place where all of us were home once again. And my work and my books and my movies has always been an attempt to tell the truth, a broad truth that includes all of us. So that once again, that notion of illegitimacy, of adoption, of wrong, of Indian, of not Indian, of Mexican, of not Mexican. People always say, oh, you don't look Indian. I always say, oh yeah, I know I look Filipino. You know, Louise Erdrich, the writer, she wrote Love Medicine, great books. Her father's German and her mother's Ojibwe, and the Ojibwe are mixed with French. And Louise is very fair-skinned, and when she was receiving the LA Times Book Award, someone came up to her and said, gee, Louise. Or somebody said that to me, you know, okay, what's next? But they said, gee, Louise, I didn't think you looked Indian. And she said, well, gee, I didn't think you looked rude. You know, and I always want to use that, because, you know, again, what's an Indian supposed to look like? You know, and again, the invisible things here. One of the interesting things is, you know, until there were casinos, nobody knew there were Indians in California, did they? We all died in the mission. Right? We're either Mexicans or something else. I mean, they're still telling those stories. And people say, well, then if you're all mixed blood and all of this, how are you still Indians? Because the language, the stories, and the cultures persist. And also something else persists. A legacy of colonialism reflected in poverty, ill health, and missed opportunity, low self-esteem, that survives and continues to survive. And again, those are the kinds of things we must address in looking at the whole picture. The whole Indian/Sonoma County / all of us picture. And the Indian story that I told is just a way of telling all of our stories. Because ultimately, it does connect to all of us. And I will continue. I'm hoping to come back here. Think, folks, those of you who've been reading the paper lately, how much trouble I've caused 500 miles away in LA. Think what I'll do when I get here. Are you listening, Sonoma State? You know, it's really interesting about Indian people. There's two stereotypes that have prevailed through history. We're either the fallen nature god, where you pity us once we've been defeated and separated from nature, or we're wagon burners. When we're a threat, we're wagon burners. You know, when I was making movies and writing books about Santa Rosa, and Robert Redford was here, the newspapers had headlines calling me, front pages calling me Santa Rosa's native son. I announced my tribe is going to do a casino, and I become devil #1, right? Suddenly, I'm not an Indian any longer because, you know, I don't want to, you know, I guess hover around and eat acorn mush for them or weed baskets. No, I want our people to have economic opportunity and create a situation that will benefit all of us. You know, and I'm neither a wagon burner nor a fallen nature god. As I hope you've heard tonight, I'm a complex individual, good and bad, white and not white, who wants to try to do the right thing and tell a true story. Thank you. Thank you. I'll take questions. Now it's supposed to be a discussion, and I've blabbed almost the whole time. So I'll take questions. Everybody always says, well, you know, not this group, I know you're too sophisticated, but a lot of places I go throughout the country, they say, are you into nature? And I said, well, you're breathing, aren't you? What is being into nature? You go around hugging trees, humping gopher holes? I don't know. There's a question in the back.
Come up to the mic so everybody
come up to the mic. Not everybody has as big a mouth as I do, fortunately for the world.
Good evening, Greg. I don't know if you remember me or not. I think we met at Gold's Gym.
Do Indians go to Gold's?
It was quite a number of years ago in Santa Rosa. At any rate, I'm also part Indian, I'm part Cheyenne, and I was wondering, kind of hoping that you might branch us out a little bit so that we can be known for other things besides casino, make it a casino and a spa. So all goes well.
I've got good news for you. Listen.
Make it a spa.
Let me tell you something. One of the unique features that we have, and now I don't want to get on my platform, but one of the things that we were able to negotiate that ought to make you feel very good is that the tribe has total control over the design and development, whatever goes there. The developers do not. We'll be picking out the color of the carpet. So let me tell you, there will be a great spa. Anything else? There's a question in the back here. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know the difference. What is a rancheria and what is a reservation?
Good question. Really good question. A rancheria and a reservation are the same thing. Rancheria is the term that is used here in California and some other places in the Southwest, but here in California. And it's a borrowed term from the early Mexican period because the Mexicans created rancherias on their ranchos. And the rancheria was where the Indian labor lived. So when the early Americans came over and took over the land, they continued to have rancherias on their big pieces of property. And then when they started giving the reservations out, the Indians and the agents just called it a rancheria. They continued that term, even though, as I told you, in 1922, when they gave us the reservation, they called it a rancheria. So it's the same thing. It's a term that has survived the Mexican period.
But on the maps, you'll see something's a rancheria and something.
That's right. Right. And sometimes they just call it reservation. That's been pretty much arbitrary. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the casinos. I work for Big Valley, and they have a casino, and I think that, I don't think the reservation would have really wanted a casino right in the middle of everything, but it helps economically. The people are living in trailers. You know, they need some kind of income coming in. And you hear in the paper how it's really demonized, how people are like, oh, it's going to be horrible. Right here, Roden Park, they voted against it.
Well, yeah. I hope we don't talk too much about the casinos because there's other things that are more interesting. But you've answered your question in many ways because, yes, in fact, if they're run right, and there are bad examples out there, granted, but if they're run right, there is an opportunity for the Indian people to grow economically. But what I always tell my people, and this is important, no amount of money is going to save our soul. A poverty of the soul cannot be bought away. What money will enable us is the option to have options. Okay, education and so forth. But here in Rohnert Park, one of the things is there's going to be as close to 3,000 jobs. And, we don't even have the person power in our tribe to do that. One of the things that we negotiated with our operator is that not only will the facility be built union, but it will be run totally union, so that the maids will have retirement, dental, and health. All right. Now, who are some of the people around here complaining? Hotel owners. Because what's that going to do? It's going to raise the bar. They're saying, oh, we're going to lose our best help. You know what my answer is? Pay them better.
Yeah.
If we can just please use the mic because we're doing a live feed so our online listeners can hear the question. We can all hear inside, but our online listeners won't be able to hear it unless we talk in the mic.
This is a non-casino question. I've always wanted to ask this question. I used to use hearing the old ones talk.
Yes.
For a class, for teaching ethnicity and language. I don't know what it is I love about it, but it's my favorite thing that you've written. And I wanted you to maybe confirm some things I thought about it that I said, well, this is probably what you mean. It's just the ethics of storytelling. How, when the first part of that, when you talk about Grandma Nettie and this experience she had.
By the way, she's still alive, 99 years. We don't know if she's 99 or 101.
Wow.
She's over there, still tough.
Well, the way she tells the story, what happened to her, having students read that, they're always like, they have no idea what she's saying. So we sort of go through it in this sort of circular
thing of trying to say, what is Graminetti saying? So I guess what I want to say is storytelling, you know, we often think there's just this thing called stories and anybody can hear them and anybody can interpret them, but really there's certain ways people tell stories, certain cultures tell stories. So I don't know if I'm opening up a place there to answer, but how is that different?
Well, that's a good question. The question is how, it's a big question you asked, a big philosophical one, which I can't, we'll have a great talk when I get here. But for the audience, how is like native storytelling and so forth, how is it different? And I don't want to generalize about Indian people, but my experience with Mabel McKay and some of the poem elders here was that they never gave you answers. They sort of did what E.E. Cummings asked you to do. The better answer asked the bigger question. They made you constantly think and wonder. Mabel would be really smart. It seemed like she was being snide, but she really was making you think. For instance, when people said, "You're an Indian doctor, what do you do for poison oak?" She'd say, "Calamine lotion." But again, what she was really saying is, think of me more than as somebody who just humps around the bush, and why would you go out and grind up leaves or roots when you can buy something at a supermarket? Right? I mean, again, what these Indian people, these storytellers that I experience are often doing is making you question, making you think. They didn't give you answers. And one of the things I try to do in those essays is almost present the essay that way, where meaning keeps turning even as I'm writing. I'm trying to represent that experience in some of those essays. I was talking at dinner about when I teach American Indian literature courses, the first thing I do is I go in there and I take roll, a big class sort of like this, and I say, okay, then I tell them a creation story about Coyote and Frog Woman and how they were married, blah, 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 and how this came and that came. And then I go, they all love that, because it's really hard teaching American Indian literature courses, because students come there thinking it's going to be a magical mystery tour, and it's real literature, right? They have to write papers and do all of that. No. I thought it would be like mescaline. So we get there, and then they come back the second day, and I divide them into pairs or into fours, and I say, whoever can tell me, get the closest version, closest to exactly what I said, and get an A. And you should hear them scramble. And they're all trying to go, what came first, what came first? Well, in the story, I have Frog Woman out washing clothes, and then later I have her crying and creating the rivers and the streams and so forth. And when she was crying, Coyote got mad at her eventually and said, go jump in the lake, and she's been there ever since. That's why when you see Frog, she's always looking up like that, because what he did is he took her children, her two sons, and threw one up into the sky, and he became the moon, and the other one became the sun. That's why she's always looking for her kids. But anyway, what they try to do is get everything in line. And then I play back my version, where there's all these inconsistencies in their views about water, what came first. And what does it show, folks? It shows who they are. Their notion of Genesis is linear. It's biblical. It's based on what came first, second, third, fourth. And in my story, it didn't work. And when they see that, they begin to understand. They're open. Reading about, learning about, hearing about other cultures isn't just so you can get a mass of information. It's to help you better understand who you are, what defines you, the way your borders are in some ways interrupted. So many times my students say, I don't have any culture. I'm white, middle-class male. There's no culture. I'm McDonald's culture. I go, oh, you do. The problem is the boundaries aren't tested. If you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're lesbian or gay, you're constantly reminded of what you're not and what constitutes you as a cultured person, right? And when you learn about other people, you begin to see, oh, I do have boundaries. I am a culture. I am part of something. In this case, at least you have biblical beliefs that shape how you think about Genesis. And that's how we begin a dialogue. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. I'm from the other side of the border. I'm Mexican, so I disclaim everything of the Mexicans did here before I came here.
Good for you.
I'm to
And
Tarahumara.
through you, I will too.
I'm part Tarahumara Indian from the Sierra Chihuahua, French, and Mexican. So that makes me a Mexican. I'm Spanish, mestizo woman.
Yes.
I have a question. Well, the other thing, I have a story of my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was Tamara, Indian, and I had a question, okay? I asked a relative of her, how was she? And she said, well, she was very traviesa. And I said, why? Because she had a lot of husbands. She had 6. And with each of the husbands, it was black, Anglo, and Mexicans. So my grandmother is from Mexican side. Okay, my question is, Native American youth and Mexican youth have a lot of problems together. Do you think we can work together in helping our youth that are into drugs, gangs, and they're lost?
You asked 2 big questions. You asked one question, and let me comment on what you said first. You know, the Mexican history is fascinating because people don't realize the first Mexicans who came here, Pio Pico, they were part black. Remember, because of in Mexico, the Emancipation Proclamation enabled slaves to earn their freedom, like in basically one day of work. So they married mostly Indians or mestizo women. And Pio Pico, the first governor of California, he was a quarter African. But people don't talk about that. One of the things that happens in colonialized situations, and you see it in Mexico, is the lighter you are, the more on top, European on top, and the darker you're on the bottom. There's a caste system, right? If you don't believe me, watch telenovelas. All the big owners are blonde and the maids look like Indians, right? The bigger question, and then again, look at the true history. The bigger question is, our kids who are in gangs and all of that, can we help them? Can we work together? The Indians, the Mexican kids, we must. We must. And you know what? When I tell people, when I go to talk in the barrios and the ghettos and the reses and kids around the schools, I look at these kids and I say, now that it's illegal for people to rape us, torture us, abuse us in the fields, why are we doing it to each other?
Yeah.
If you really are angry, go up to Montecito Heights. Start a revolution. But it's internalized oppression. We have become oppressor-like. We see it in the Indian communities. We pick on one another. We're mean to one another. We also start, within our own communities, notions of illegitimacy. When I was a kid, they'd always say, oh, you're light, say you're Spanish. Then when the AIM movement came, oh, you're too light, march in the back. Right? Notice within our own ranks, we do that. Delegitimize those within our own ranks. Oh, she's a black bitch, or she's white, or she's this. We hear all that all the time. But that's the devil. That's colonization at work. We're finishing it. It's become a spirit in us that we must expel. And what we have to do is take these kids and doctor them. We have to take that spirit out by letting them see what it is. Why are they killing each other? Why don't they understand? They have no hope. They have no hope. People can't imagine that. When I was doing Grand Avenue, again, that mother who was alcoholic and had 3 kids by 3 different guys, the producers in Hollywood were saying, doesn't she want her kids to go to college or have piano lessons? I said, listen, she's trying to figure out how she's going to get money to go and get to McDonald's to feed her kids dinner. They said, well, she's having trouble with her daughter. Why don't they go to counseling? Poverty, socioeconomic conditions, the ways in which it creates a hopelessness and a powerlessness that goes along with that is what must be overcome. And these young people, that's what we've got to do. And that's one of the things I really want to address here. I was talking to Darius at dinner about the gangs. El Norte and the South. You're all Mexicans. Quit it! And as I say to Indian people, when we fight and talk about one another, I said they're just sitting there laughing at us because we're finishing each other off for them. So once you start, again, talking and reaching these kids, we must all work together. And we must see how our histories are connected. And that we are ultimately, regardless of color and all that, one blood. But it's going to take those of us who have a little money and those of us who are in a position of power to be responsible, to go out there. Part of the problem is when you get comfortable, in America you get a sense of entitlement. I need to be comfortable, and that's painful. Well, you know what? If you don't start dealing with that pain now, it's going to be like cancer. And baby, it's going to be right up your foot and leg and eat your body. You don't start dealing with it now. Any other questions or answers? Yes?
Yes, I have a question related to that. The poison that you talk about in Grand Avenue, that you spoke about a little bit in your speech tonight, is that related to this overall societal force, or is that a more internalized, localized phenomenon? Is that more like ostracism or voodoo or something alternate to that, or a combination of that? Or
Well, let's talk about that. In my book, and a lot of the books that Mabel's talking about, in the old days, the Indians always, there was poison. There was things that backfired. And the devil or the spirit, it keeps finding homes. When we're insecure, when we're frightened, we make way for poison. Whether it's to hate yourself, or whether in the old Indian world, it was to use some kind of power you had to what? Put a spell on somebody. But what do the young kids do today? What's their poison? A gun. A gun. And until we can begin to doctor and take that poison out of their hearts, they're going to use poison, aren't they? And so, while it is a concept, and it was something the Indian people did, it's something that we must see living still. It lives still. For the Indian people, poison and songs and all that was living. It was something that had power. And if you think about it, in our own lives, the anger, the things that we're mad about, they live in us, don't they? And the whole thing is, a lot of psychology, old psychology, wanted to get you over it. You never get over the fact that you may have been molested as a kid, or abused, that or hurt in some way. That never goes away. But what you must learn to do is live with it. Mabel McKay told me something when I was 19 years old. It was really, and that was a woman who had a second grade education, and she had more knowledge and sense than all those professors at Stanford put together. She had it in her little finger. And she said, lots happened to you, Greg. A lot of bad things. But she said, you still have two choices. She says, you can have holes in your heart and make room for poison and keep poisoning yourself and poisoning other people. Or you can use it as medicine. You've learned how the poison works, and you can take that to doctor. And she said, when I was learning to be a doctor woman, the spirit was showing her poison, cancer, Indian poison, all that stuff, how it worked, how it lived. Why? She had to know it so that she could counteract it when she doctored. And those of us, those kids in the streets, they're potentially our best doctors. They know something. We need them.
Greg, Terry, you know me from a few years back.
Yes, Terry.
You stood with us on 4th Street at the Courthouse Square that you talked about, where Indians were sold, and went on air and promoted a community youth center for us in Southwest Santa Rosa. That was several years ago. Because of our socioeconomic status in Southwest Santa Rosa, we hadn't gotten any support. We were told 2 weeks ago that if we would help get a senior center up on the other side of town, they would in turn help us get a community center, one that's very much needed in Southwest Santa Rosa to stop the cancer of the youth going out and all the gangs that you're speaking of. I'd like to get a commitment from you that that'll be something that, since it's going to be in the backyard of where the new hotel casino is up at Southwest Santa Rosa, and the community center, which is going to be on Hearn Avenue, that'll be something we could talk to you about.
You certainly can talk to me. Just remember, I always get tagged as the big guy, but it's a tribal decision. But I pretty much can read my tribe, and that's one of the things. I defer always, I have to the council, because I've made decisions where they yanked me back and said no. And one of the things we are a community, and everything we do, everything I do, when I teach and write books, I get away with murder, and then my family all talks about me and says he doesn't know what he's talking about. But when it comes to tribal stuff, like this, Terry, I always defer to the tribe, but my sense is that you will get a commitment from us, because this is the thing we want to do. As you know already, we have borrowed upwards of $20 million, over 15 of which has gone to social programs and open land and open space.
I stood with Hugh Cotty when you guys handed the city of Rohnert Park almost $800,000. I couldn't believe it. You haven't even put a shovel in the ground, so You don't worry about those cops over here. They're here to applaud
Well,
you.
you know, the other thing you mentioned, thank you for mentioning that, Terry, about the $750,000 we gave for a new task force, police task force. And, you know, they were very worried that, you know, we're about corruption and what this casino is going to do, especially those people that live in the mobile home park. But, you know, as a result of the task force, they busted 3 crystal meth labs over there. So we were thinking we'd have to put a sign up, beware of the mobile home park. But thank you for the work you do, and keep doing it. And we're there. One of the things that we wanted to do, that's all right, you know, open space, land, environment, social justice, it takes money. And you know, one of the things about us and being in a position to have a casino or resort, one of our dreams isn't to get more color TVs. It's to help buy the world we think is right. And whether you know it or not, it takes money. Goodwill ain't enough, as you just said. So I'm not a gambler, I don't even drink. But if this is an opportunity, I used to just sniff a lot of glue. You know, this is a little footnote. I sniffed so much glue as a kid, and you know, a PhD, 6 books, movies, chairman of the tribe, a bill I got through Congress. If I hadn't killed all those brain cells, think what I would be. I would be Einstein off his money. You know, so there's hope. Okay.
Dr. Sarris, what was your, I have 2 questions. The first thing is very simple and brief. What was your PhD dissertation in?
My PhD was from Stanford in very Tony, modern thought and literature. And I did my dissertation on cross-cultural reading of multicultural text. How do we read text from other cultures? Much like the question you asked. How do we read? How do we know another person and why? To try to create a more humane humanities. You know, the English departments in those places, they get very lofty. They've created this fancy theoretical language, and yet they're all Marxists and want to represent the people, but nobody but them can understand what they're talking about. That's another way the devil works. See, that's the way the devil works. Separation, disconnect. As an academic, we've got to connect.
Another quick question. When I went to, I'm a Rohnert Park citizen, and when I went to the city council, I was very biased, hate to say. Because
You're right.
I have children,
Yeah.
okay, and I was worried about the casino, but I listened to both sides, and I realized, I became very objective, realized that's the only way the Native Americans could prosper. But, you know, I'm looking at this analogy. You're going around and you're talking to gangs. What really was despicable at those meetings was how should I say this without offending anybody, the religious fundamentalists and their prejudices towards you guys. How do you try to get rid of the hypocrisy and talk to various churches who are supposed to help people, but in actuality, there's a lot of hypocrisy, and that's what really turned me off and made me more pro-casino, voting for casino, and listening to everything you had to say and how that's the only way the Native Americans could prosper. And the second question, of course, was how do you turn around some of these churches that just thrive on hypocrisy? That really is despicable. It really perturbs me. So.
Thank you for at least acknowledging that question. The second question, the hypocrisy. That was one of the hardest things for me. When there were bumper stickers around here, as you know, here in Sonoma that said, "Not here, Tonto." If it had said, "Not here, nigger or kike," would this been okay? No. But this was going on. There were death threats against the tribe. Members of that church on record are saying that we weren't real Indians, that I was a front for the mafia. Of course, the logic there's a little skewed, because if you want a front for the mafia, won't you at least get a guy that looks more quote-unquote Indian instead of some guy with blue eyes? I mean, if you're going to fake it right, you know. And they were saying that I picked up a bunch of Mexicans in Coddingtown and created a tribe. Again, there's this constant, and what a lot of these church people do, where's just the prejudice which you heard, which they're saying horrible things, by the way, just about race and Indians. And you have a right to object morally to a casino. You have a right to believe what you believe. But I believe we need to be honest about facts and fight it on those grounds. Let's just be honest. I'm not going to take away your right to disbelieve or to agree with or not agree with me. But I am going to ask you to be honest, and I'm going to ask you to hold the racist rhetoric. right? These aren't Indians. As you heard, all the kind of stuff. And it was public. And, you know, I had some friends here from the university, Loyola Marymount, where I teach in Southern California, and they were appalled. They said, this is like the South in the 40s and the 50s. The stuff that was going on and the way people were talking, it was unbelievable. And the things that have been said to me in public, and the way misinformation, things have been skewed in the newspaper, and the Human Rights Commission. We took 52 pages there. I called the Human Rights Commission twice to say there's been death threats. We get letters that say the only good Indian is a dead Indian. You know, death to Greg Sarris, and, you know, your days are numbered, all this kind of stuff in the mail. I called the Human Rights Commission in Sonoma County. I never hear back from them. A wonderful guy named Steve Carroll happened to be on the commission at the time, and he said, he called me up because he wanted me to speak at something for the Human Rights Commission like 4 or 5 months later. Dump me, I thought they were finally returning my call. I said, oh, you got the report. He said, what? I said, well, I sent you this stuff, and so anyway, he did a little pushing and so forth. The head of the Human Rights Commission, who's since been left, asked to leave, did a campaign to bury not only my call, but a 52-page report of hate violence, and said it was political and not racial. How do you, in this instance, separate race from politics? When Martin Luther King was sitting in at a counter, that was political, but it was also racial. And again, I don't care what you believe, but you have a responsibility to be honest and to be fair. And you know what? That's the way you're going to win. Truth, is like a cork in water, as my auntie says. It will rise. And of course, many of these racist people, I just sat with some of them in Sacramento recently, still say the same things, make up stories, make up lies. And I don't care, but don't tell me, who fought personally and with my tribe for legitimacy to be here, that I'm not an Indian. Don't tell me that this history didn't happen. When you heard some of them say, I'm 4th generation Rohnert Park, you know, I'm old enough, and some of the people here, remember this was a hay field? It was a seed farm. Some of our parents worked in it, right? Rohnert Park is 40 years old. My God, every 10 years they're having babies. They must be hitting puberty at 3. I mean, I don't care, just tell the truth. History. I mean, if that's true, I really want to read and learn about it. But, you know, again, some of the, you know, we really need ways to tell the truth. And you have a right to believe whatever you believe. But again, as I keep saying, let truth reign. Let the real stories out there. And don't delegitimize me and my people and our history because you happen to disagree with one thing. Disagree and fight on those grounds, but don't undermine the person and the people. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I want to say a quick comment before I ask my question about the casinos, because I'm a Rohnert Park resident,
Okay.
and I was appalled at the tactics that they were using. At one point, someone approached me. I was so glad that they didn't get the recall, you know, that didn't happen, because someone approached me and said, would you sign this petition so the residents of Rohnert Park can vote on whether or not there's a casino? And I read it, and it was the recall petition. So they were getting signatures by lying to people about what the petition was really for. So I was so happy when you guys got to see it.
Well, and I have to tell you something else that was a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
We had signs up on no on recall, and how many of those had bullet holes through them around?
Mm-hmm. It was just disgusting.
There were the things, yes, on recall, we didn't tear them down or write things on them or do things. Again, those kinds of things are frightening. And let's always be honest and let's understand the issues and fight fairly. We're trying to do something right. I didn't want a casino. You know what? I'll make an offer, and I've said this everywhere I've talked. If you can create a tax in Sonoma County that will enable us to get sociologically equitable, where we have the same kind of statistics in terms of health, education, and so forth as everybody else, the average citizen, I'll say right now, I don't need a casino. We don't need a casino. right? I'm saying that right now. Think it's going to work, folks? No. If you do, come talk to me. But no, it's not going to happen. And again, let's look at the statistics. The life expectancy for a California Indian male is 47 years. I should have been dead 5 years ago. Okay, 80% of our kids are dropping out by 9th grade. Diabetes, in some places, 80 and 90%, right? Again, the legacy of colonialism and poverty persists among our people. And, you know, if you could create a tax that would fix all that, I'm with you. But if you can't, and I have an opportunity that will help that, but also help everybody else, let's do it. And, you know, when we talk, you know, remember the history here. We got restored, and we tried for 2.5 years other means of economic development. Organic food processing, a cheese factory, grape growing. Unfortunately, there's a glut in Northern California on each of those things, but we also couldn't get any collateral because we didn't have any money. So how do you get started? When people began to discuss the C word, I thought, oh no, now I really got to go back to my books. But my mother, God rest her soul, said, now you can't leave because there's too many bad examples of what can happen out there. You can make it right. I talked with the tribe. We decided if we can create a model that doesn't just benefit us, but benefits the larger non-Indian community, then let's go do it. Let's try to do something. Let's build it green. Let's see if we can do the right thing. And that's what we're trying to do. And again, we have, you know, again, the right to do that. We were illegally, as I said, terminated, and our land, our reservation was taken away. The other thing they keep trying to misinformation is that we're reservation shopping. Reservation shopping means you move out of your Aboriginal territory and go in somebody else's territory. Southern Sonoma County and all of Marin is our Aboriginal territory. We're 11 miles as a crow flies from our original reservation in Grain. But there's even something better for the concerned citizens. Law says you can only have one piece of trust land and one casino. They're not going to be a cancer up and down 101. Again, these myths that keep going. This is law. If you don't believe me, just look it up. But again, the hysteria and people trying to make careers out of this. Joe Nation. Oh, he's amazing. He'll suck my toes when he wants a letter to try to save the Lake Tolay thing. He takes me to lunch and we tour around and here's Indian stories and oh, Greg, you're the greatest. Then he introduces bills and tells people in Marin, you got to watch out for those great Indians. If it doesn't work out in Rohnert Park, they're going to be right down here.
Oh yeah, I called the registrar because
Again, be
the person
fair.
who tried to get me to sign it ran for city council. And I was like, this is a person who's trying to take a place based on fraud, and they wouldn't do anything. They said, you have to call the state. I was like, you know.
Well, as one of these people said in Sacramento recently, here from Rohnert Park, nobody's for this casino. They come up to me all the time, and I had to remind her. I said, listen, each of us is a beacon, and we talk to the choir. Just as many people come up to me, and so I'm going to say, you have to at least be objective and understand the people that are going to come up and talk to you are usually those who are for you. So, in all fairness, let's just be fair, right? But
oh, sorry. The
go ahead.
question I wanted to
The
ask
question,
you.
okay.
Sorry. Based on what went on in this community is a good example of this culture of racism. People don't talk about it, but it's there. And I have small children, and it starts in preschool when they talk about Thanksgiving and the way that Native Americans are portrayed as gone and dead and don't exist anymore. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I started learning actual U.S. history that I started to feel betrayed and lied to my whole life. And I felt like this whole group of people had been so dehumanized to me. I was just robbed of learning of this important part of my own history as an American citizen. And I want to know, as a teacher, what you can recommend we can do in this kind of community for our children to be sure that they don't grow up that same way, learning those same things. So,
Well, that's a huge question, what we can do for the children. We've talked a little bit about that tonight, but as a teacher, one of the most important things you can do is when students say things to one another, just ask why. How do you know? Why did you say that? And usually, right away, they'll be caught in their own prejudice and bias, whether they heard it from their parents. Ask them why. The other thing I did, at Stanford, I remember I had an Israeli woman and an Iraqi guy. No, he was actually a Palestinian guy in the class at the same time. It was his freshman English lesson. Boy, the tension between those. You know what I had them start doing? Because I was a teacher, I had power. I made them tell each other's story. Quit arguing. You tell his story and you tell her story. And they had to begin to imagine the other story. And at the end of that, they still disagreed, but they understood that they were human. And that's one of the things you have to do always, I think, in that situation here. What scares me, what came out in Rohnert Park in this thing, is how close to the surface racism and hostility is. We think we've made big strides. And when I saw that, I was shocked. And I wasn't so upset about the casino business. I was so depressed for my home. And when I was thinking of coming back here, and to think that I might have to feel frightened to be home, I thought, my gosh, we're back 150 years. And no matter how you feel about this, you can't let that happen. You can't let anybody be afraid, because that's what happens. And so much of our Indian culture is based on women in particular in our culture. It's biblical, this time it's a woman's story. But in our culture, women being so afraid and having to be concubines in many ways to survive. And you know, fear and all those kinds of things, those are passed down. That's a devil that keeps growing, like low self-esteem, like the effects of alcoholism and everything. They keep going and manifesting themselves. And until you name it and stop it and ask students to name it and stop it, it won't stop. But boy, it was out in the open in Rohnert Park. And no matter how you feel, say rape, prejudice, and those kinds of things, don't go. But it shows also, folks, all of us, the work. The problem is, looking out at all of you tonight, I'm talking, I think, to the choir, right? The problem is those who aren't here and those who are saying things about the tribe and all of that. By the way, there are tribal members here. I almost said if I was at a wedding, I would know what side is my family. Tribal members are great. Would you stand up, show that you're living? Stand up. Don't be shy. Come on. I always do this. Stand up. In fact, Annie's and George's great-great-great-grandmother from Agwali, that's right up here at the tip of the bay. That's where they're originally from, taken into the mission. And Lee, her family is originally from Sebastopol area. We trace ourselves back. They also said, we weren't really Indians. Well, to be a member of the tribe as Indian people, and many Indians on the audience, I see your faces and know you. We have to be enrolled. You have to prove by careful documentation your lineage. I mean, you have to have had an ancestor on the roll. There are a lot of unfair situations where people might not have been there on the day the census was there, the census taker was there, and it's not fair. I know there's Wapo people here, and they still are not recognized. And there are people with a distinct language, certainly anthropologists and others, and they certainly deserve the recognition also and to be restored. It's on and on, the injustices that still go on. But be assured, as Grayton progresses, we're going to be great troublemakers in this community.
I guess speaking of troublemaking, there's a very substantial Native population in the surrounding area, and that population, I think, is not represented here at this institution, and I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of what ought this institution be doing to make it a more inclusive.
Well, Darius, thank you. The question is, there is a very large Indian population here in Sonoma, Lake Mendocino County, and Marin County, and what can we do to make it more representative on this campus? Well, let me give a campaign speech, not about the casino. If I become a professor here. One of the things that really has to happen, and I was able to do this at Stanford and Berkeley, is you need to take undergraduates, Indian and non-Indian, and create a mentor program where you take those students to mentor Indian students once or twice a week. Create a unit class here in the School of Education where they get units towards their degree. They go out and mentor, but it has to be a whole family thing. So twice a semester, you bring the student and their families here for a tour of the campus, for dinner, to talk to professors, to a science lab, to a baseball game. You need to create a road between this institution and the community. The community's there. This institution needs to make a commitment to do that. And it can be done. And, you know, it doesn't take a lot of money. I mean, there's ways to use your students. Because one of the things that the students in the communities do, many of whose parents have never gone to college, when they see others like them doing it and talking to them and walking them over, the campus becomes a familiar place. It's not something that's way over there that people I don't know anything about do. When we took the Indian undergraduates up to Kashaya in here, the kids were just amazed because they were seeing Indian kids who were going to Stanford. And suddenly, that becomes, in their mind, a possibility. Oh, okay.
I was having a conversation the other day with a colleague, and I said that I have signed some petitions in support of Ward Churchill. And then she said, oh, but he's not an Indian. Of course, I didn't know about that argument. And I said, but is that reason enough not to support him? And she said, no, it's not. But, you know.
So, you know, leave it to me to get in trouble. I gave a keynote address at the University of Colorado that was scheduled a year ago on the day this blew up there. Yes. So, about Ward Churchill. And so on the plane, I'm quickly reading all the stuff. And the question of whether he's Indian or not, I'm not the Indian cop. I don't want to say, you know, who is. I mean, there's a lot of people who do that. I've heard very conflicting reports that he wasn't Indian. I don't think he's enrolled anywhere, but that doesn't necessarily.
Whether he's enrolled. I think that's a big part.
The question is whether or not he's enrolled. But remember, he may come from a tribe that's not recognized. If he went to Owapo, they're not enrolled because they don't have the opportunity to be enrolled anywhere. So I don't know. I don't know, and I don't want to question that. My own personal take on Ward Churchill and what he said, I think it was unfortunate. I agree with basically the sentiment that what you do overseas is going to get you in trouble and make people angry, but you don't say people deserve to get killed. You don't fight war and violence with death and violence rhetoric. Okay, you rise above it and say what he could have said very simply. The way Susan Sontag did in the New Yorker about 3 weeks after 9/11, she did a very articulate column about people getting angry at our policies over there and people getting out of control over those policies. She didn't condone the violence or anything, you know, she didn't say it was okay, but she said at least we can understand why people might get angry. But to say that somebody in the towers deserved to die and to call them little Eichmanns and things like that, for me, I can't, don't go there. I mean, again, back to your thing about how did you handle the hatred at Rohnert Park. It was a real test for me and my fear and amongst our people to deal with that. I mean, we were going in and out of the building when we had the meeting over there. An older woman, 82 years old, was pushed and called squaw, and you know, yeah, and things like that. And it was very hard not to want to strike back or to go back and use that kind of rhetoric or something. So it was a real test. And I have to say, in my private moments at home, I fantasized, you know. But again, our people, I'm so proud of us, never went low, went to that place. You know, I was teaching a literature class. I think I was teaching Flannery O'Connor to a big class at Stanford. And, you know, we were talking about people murdering people. The students were just all shocked, ready to condemn. And I said, come on, now let's be honest. How many of you here have not really thought of murdering somebody? Right? And there was this woman in the front row who was like 90 pounds, hadn't said a thing all quarter. She finally raises her hand and she says, Professor Sarris, does maiming count? I said, yeah, big time. But, you know, the thing is, you see this as a test. And the thing that's kept me going, again, is my family and my people, that to watch them live here and have to take that and turn their back or turn the other cheek, as Jesus would say. Turn the other cheek, as any leader, Buddha or any of them would have said, to rise above it and hope that truth will prevail. Respect difference, but don't condemn it. Any other questions or answers? One more, okay? I'll talk all night. You know, my family's here. They'll tell you I'll stay up all night. They say all he does is talk. He doesn't know anything. That's how I got through school. I told you, oral cultures.
Greg, I'm Osage from Oklahoma. We're the oil Indians. And I wonder, when I think about what happened to us with getting just an amazing amount of money in a short time, I wonder if you're all ready for that. And I hope you are. It sounds like you are. It looks like you are. But, we let ourselves get divided. And it's taken us 98 years. We just now got to go through Congress to get our sovereignty back. And I just wonder if you've thought about that.
I'm glad you raised that. Maybe that's a really good place to end the night, to talk about, if we get really rich quick, what's going to happen. You know, casinos are the most radical thing that's happened to Indians since the gold rush. Those who are affected by them, directly affected, because the culture goes in such flux when you have the opportunity for money. Now, casinos don't automatically mean money, because people have to pay back investors and all of that. But we have talked about that, and we have been together, and we knew we didn't even want to do a casino. We wanted to take care of our own. And we created a situation where provided things go well, we'll have control of the money and be able to call our own destiny. But the most important part of it that we always talk about is how we get to buy open land, how we get to help education, how we help our kids. That's what the people talk about. And this tribe is amazing. They keep, there's a lot of, often in other tribes, like politics, that divides, money divides. Well, they don't want to get rid of me, and I'm a crab and a terrible person, and we just hang together. I'm serving my 7th consecutive elected term. And again, you've heard my philosophy. It's ours. It's theirs. It's mine. And, the test will be, if money ever comes, money comes, the test will be, we'll see what happens. Because I'm sure, it does things. But if you have somebody up there constantly saying, think, at least you get a good chance. George, you want to say?
Like you said, though, if we ever did get a casino or whatever, the first 1,000 workers will be our tribe. They'll all go to work then.
Well, one of the things that George said, one of the first 1,000 workers will be our tribe. Yeah, we only have 700 and something adults, but we have no child labor, George. Don't start.
Yeah. I'll be retired, I've got my 30 years.
But, you can't control what people are going to do. But this has been a generous tribe. We have revenue sharing. And before we had stations, our investors helping to pay our office, our rent and stuff, the revenue sharing, which we get from the gambling tribes, because we don't have a casino, our tribe voted not to distribute the money per capita. They voted, keep it and buy a building or something for all of us. And that's been our philosophy. Okay, anything else? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you so much.